So very quickly, let's have a look at my standard equipment table for tools. And this is where I actually advocate what tools to take in what scenarios out there. So it's really the crux of my advice. And I've got my 4 camping scenarios down here: half a day, 1 day, 24-hour, multiple day. Anything up to half a day, from a few hours to half a day. A full day in the field with no overnight. 24-hour scenario is a 1 overnight. It can be longer than 24 hours in theory, but that's just what I've called it. You leave on 1 day, 1 overnight, come home on the next day, and multiple day is 2 or more overnights. Then my gear ranking scale of must have, should have, can have, fairly self-explanatory, and I have talked about all those scenarios in previous videos in my Adventure Craft playlist. So I've talked about all those concepts. So what we're going to do is start off with a half a day and must have, the bare minimum, I'm saying a number 5 camp knife. I'm thinking that's the bare minimum tool. And bearing in mind, this is all debatable, sure, you can disagree, but I am being conservative in my advice. I'm not telling you have to take massive loads of tools out there with you. So the bare minimum is a number 5 camp knife. But I'm saying you should have at least your smaller working knife, number 4. If I go into the field, I normally comply with everything up to should have, so I'm normally carrying my smaller working knife. And then you can have your main working knife, that around a 6-inch blade, full tang, thick blade and so forth for batoning, so you can have that. For a 1 day scenario, now we're going to be out in the field for a whole day. The smaller working knife has now come up to must have. Then you've got your camp knife there. Then your main working knife comes up to should have. So you should have your main working knife. And then for can have, your chopping tool has now come into it. That's why there's an asterisk there. It's just that bonus tool to give you some chopping ability. And then your number 6 folding knives are all can haves. They're just can haves. You know, they're just folding knives, handy tools, but can haves. And maybe your multi-tool can come into a can have for a full 1 day out there. When you're doing an overnight, at least one overnight, we're in the field now, and you've got the main working knife, I think, has come up to must have now. Then you've got your smaller working knife and your camp knife. Then should have, the chopping tool with an asterisk, 3A chopping tool, the CT, is now a should have to give you some chopping ability if you need it for an emergency. It's only for emergencies, for the short term, if you need to do some chopping, trees, branches, make a shelter or something. And then can haves, your number 1 heavy duty machete and the number 2 axe now become can haves. You know, you can go camping quite happily for many days, and you may not need some heavy tools to do chopping work, because if you're safe, you're confident, you know where you're going, you know you're going to have plenty of firewood and fuel, you may not need those heavy duty tools, but they're just a can have for at least a 24-hour. Then your number 6 folding knives still can have, and your multi-tool, and now your foldable pruning saws come in as a can have for 24-hour. Now we come up to a multiple day trip, 2 or more overnights. Your chopping tools come up to must have with the asterisks. You must be able to chop, I'm thinking at least for multiple day. Then your main working knife, your smaller working knife and camp knife. Now your number 1 heavy duty machete and the small axe have now come up to should have. I'm thinking you should have those tools, the top 2 tools, or one of them, to do heavy duty chopping work. And your number 6 folding knives, multi-tool and your foldable pruning saw are still can haves. And bearing in mind, the chopping tool doesn't have to be there. If you've got that top 2 tools, the machete or the axe, you see how the chopping tool is just that bonus 3A tool. Now, as a very last point, 4 quick rules or notes to this table. The first is, we've got a choice now of 2 tools or 3 tools. I'm not saying you have to carry every tool with you, but there's no reason why you can't have, you know, multiple. So you should have a multiple range of tools and blades and chopping tools out there with you, in my opinion. But you don't have to take all these tools necessarily. But if you've got that choice, I think if you're forced to take one tool, you'll take the larger tool. Especially a smaller working knife should be able to do the work of your camp knife. You can take both, of course. Where you've got 3 tools here, you can take all 3 again. Or you can take opposites. You take your larger main working knife and then you could juxtapose it with a number 5 camp knife. Unless of course you think your smaller working knife can do all those smaller, lighter carving, skinning tasks, then you may want to take those top 2 tools, the 2 largest tools, may be a better option. Or as I said, you can juxtapose and have your larger and the smaller tool. Once you get down here, there's not really 4 tools, it's still really only a choice of 3 tools. Your main working knife, smaller working knife and camp knife, like it is there, because that chopping tool is only the bonus tool. If you're taking your top 2 tools for heavy chopping work, then your chopping tool doesn't have to come into it. And that 4th rule, the 4th point or note to the table is, obviously you're going to take whatever tools you need to do the work you're planning to do. If you're planning and actually want to do some chopping work, then of course you're going to take your bigger tools. You may just go out for half a day to a base camp. You want to do some chopping work, some woodworking, cut down a few trees, build a primitive shelter or something. Obviously you want to take the tools commensurate to what work you want to do out there. But apart from that, of course you don't need to carry your top tools for a quick walk. That's why I've got this standard equipment table based on those 4 camping scenarios and must have, should have and can have. I hope that makes sense. That's my standard equipment table and I'll see you next time.